Good day, everyone. Before we present the statistical tools used in our project, we would first like to introduce the two published studies we selected. The first study focuses on evaluating the knowledge, attitude, and practices of radiologic technologists in relation to infection prevention and control. The paper includes structured survey data and uses statistical methods to determine patterns, trends, and levels of compliance among professional rednecks. We selected this study because it provides a clear categorical and numerical data that are suitable for descriptive and inferential statistical analysis. The second study examines the practice of personal discipline among radiologic technology students and how it influences their academic performance and learning behaviors. It uses organized survey responses, Likert scale measurements, and statistical interpretations that match the competencies required.
Here, it outlines the statistical tools used in two distinct research studies, both employing a descriptive survey design. The study on the knowledge, attitude, and practice of information literacy skills in radiologic technologists collected categorical, ordinal, and interval data and relied on statistical tools like exploratory factor analysis, Cronbach's alpha for reliability, mean and standard deviation, and non-parametric tests like Mann-Whitney-U and Kruskal-Wallis tests. In contrast, the research assessing the practice of personal discipline for self-study advancement, which collected quantitative and qualitative data, utilized more straightforward descriptive statistics, including percentage and frequency, the weighted mean, mean and standard deviation, and the Likert 5-point scale for measuring attitudes or perceptions. Now, for the data type for the article, Knowledge, Attitude, and Practice of Infection Prevention and Control Among Radiologic Technologists in Davao City, to ensure our survey accurately measured knowledge, attitude, and practice, we use exploratory factor analysis. Second is we calculated the mean and standard deviation for knowledge, attitude, and practice scores. The mean tells us the overall level of each factor among the technologists, while the standard deviation shows how consistent the responses were. As to verify the reliability of our survey, we calculated Cronbach's alpha. This statistic checks if the items within each category, which is the knowledge, attitude, and practice, consistently measure the same concept. A high alpha value confirmed that our survey was reliable. Fourth is we use the Mann-Whitney-U test to compare the scores between two groups, such as male and female technologists. Since some of our data were ordinal or not normally distributed, this parametric test helped us determine if there were significant differences without assuming a normal distribution. Now, the data type being utilized for the second article, which is the practice of personal discipline among radiologic technology students in their learning advancement and assessment. So first, the researchers used percentage and frequency distribution. This tool helped them describe the students' demographic profile, including gender and year level. For instance, out of 70 students, 40 were female and 30 were male, which is 57% and 43% respectively. This method was appropriate because it clearly shows how the sample is distributed across categories, which directly supports understanding the population involved in the study. The data here is nominal for gender and ordinal for year level. In other words, it organizes information into groups, helping us see the makeup of the participants at a glance. Next, the Likert 5-point scale was used to assess students' personal discipline in areas such as time management, peer selection, and handling academic pressure. Students responded to statements like I am capable of doing tasks all the time, or I make plans to improve my decision making, on a scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree. This tool was appropriate because the study aimed to measure attitudes and perceptions, which are subjective in nature. The responses are ordinal data as they show a ranked order of agreement or disagreement, allowing researchers to see patterns in how students perceive and practice self-discipline. Finally, the researchers applied mean and standard deviation. The mean calculated the average response of students on each item, while the standard deviation showed how much the responses varied from the average. For example, in the time management category, the item I am capable of doing tasks all the time had the highest mean of 3.74, indicating that students generally agree with this statement. Meanwhile, the standard deviation allowed the researchers to understand consistency of students' responses. This method was appropriate because it helped summarize and quantify the overall tendencies and variability in the students' level of personal discipline. The data analyzed here are interval, as the Likert scale responses are treated numerically for averaging purposes. Together, these methods were ideal for addressing the study's research question, assessing how personal discipline affects learning advancement, because they accurately capture both categorical and ordinal data while providing insights into patterns and tendencies within the student's population.
We'll analyze why the researchers use those tools. So for each research, we'll be explaining why the chosen statistical methods were appropriate for the studies. In the first article, we have exploratory factor analysis, as it detects latent structure in correlated variables. So to ensure that our survey are accurately, so the measured knowledge, attitude, and practice, we use the exploratory factor analysis. So This statistical tool helped us uncover underlying pattern among the survey items, confirming that each question aligned with the correct category, whether it was assessing knowledge, attitude, or practice. So since our data came from Likert or skills and scored knowledge items, the exploratory factor was the most suitable approach. We calculated the mean and the standard deviation for the knowledge and the attitude and practice scores. The mean tells us that the overall level of each factor among the technologies, while the standard deviation shows how consistent their responses were. So this helped us understand not just the average, but also the variation in their knowledge and practices. 3 is we have Cronbach alpha. So why is appropriate? The hypothesis they used is the study needed to ensure the survey was reliable, so that the items measures knowledge, attitude, and practice were consistent internally. So the Cronbach alphas quantifies this internal consistency. So the data type they use in the survey is the ordinal or the interval data. So from Likert scales and the knowledge scores, Cronbach alpha works well for these data types to measure reliability of multi-items scales. So to verify the reliability of our survey, as we calculate the Cronbach alpha, this statistic checks if the items within each category sa knowledge and the attitude and practice of practice. So consistently, the measure is consistently measures the same concept, no? So the as a high alpha, we confirm that our surveys was reliable. So as we use the man-Whitney-U test to compare scores between the two groups, such as the male, no, and as what I said before, and the female technologies. So since some of our data were ordinal or not normal distributed, these non-parametric tests help us determine if there was significant differences without assuming a normal distribution. The last one is the critical walls test. So the hypothesis we use now is the study compared the CAP scores across more than 2 independent groups. So we have example niya in this no is the years of experience. So to assess whether differences existed. So the data type they use in the survey is the ordinal and the non-normal distributed interval data. So critical walls is non-parametric extension of the man-U test for the multiple group. So in the second article, the practice of personal discipline among radiologic technology students in their learning advancement, we have percentage and frequency distribution. No? So first, the researchers use the percentage and frequency distribution. So these tools have them describe the students' demographic profile, including the gender and year level. So for instance, out of 70 students, so we have 40 female and 30 male. So which is maging 57% na siya and 43% respectively. So this method was appropriate because it clearly shows how the sample is distributed across categories, so which directly supports understanding the population involved in the study. So the data here is nominal for gender and ordinal for year level. So in other words, no, it organizes information into groups. So it helps us see the makeup of the participants at a glance. So second is we have the Likert 5-point scales, no? So the Likert 5-point scale was used to assess students' personal discipline in area such as time management, peer selection, and handling academic pressure. So students responded to the statement like, I am capable of doing the task all the time, or I make plans to improve my decision making. So on a scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree, no? So this tool was appropriate, no, because the study aimed to measure attitudes and perceptions, so which are subjective in nature. So the responses no, are ordinal data as they show a rank order of agreement or disagreement. So it's allowing us, as the researchers, to see pattern in how students perceive and practice self-discipline. So 3 is we have the mean and the standard deviation. So finally, the researchers applied mean and the standard deviation. So that means na calculate na nila ang average response of the students on each item. So while the standard deviation showed how much the responses varied from the average, for example, so in the time management category, the item is I am capable of doing the task all the time had the highest mean of 3.74, no? So indicating that the student generally agree with the statement. So meanwhile, the standard deviation allowed the researchers to understand the consistency of students' responses. So this method was appropriate because it helped us summarize and quantify the overall tendencies, variability in the students' level of each discipline. So the data analyzed here are interval as the Likert scale responses are treated numerically for averaging purposes. So as together, this method were ideal for addressing the studies, no, for the research questions. So this is like assessing how personal discipline affects learning advancement, because they accurately capture both categorical ordinal data while providing insights into pattern and tendencies within the student population.
So next is the research design. The research title, Knowledge, Aptitude, and Practice of Infection Prevention and Control Among Radiologic Technologists in Davao City. So they used mean and standard deviation. So for its assumptions, the descriptive statistics like mean and standard deviation do not have a strict inferential assumption like normality or homoscedasticity, as they are only describing the sample data. The next, the group used a Cronbach's alpha. Then for its assumption, the primary assumption is that the items measured a single underlying construct and that the errors are uncorrelated. Then for the next test is that the researchers use the Mann-Whitney U and Kurzweil-Wallis test. So for its assumption, Mann-Whitney U test, so it is appropriate for comparing two independent groups, such as the male and female technologists. And for the Kurzweil-Wallis test, so it's appropriate for comparing three or more independent groups, such as the age groups or the years of experience groups. So they have the independence. The samples are drawn independently with 1 to 5 years of experience in independent of the 6 to 10 year group. And the next is the ordinal scale. The dependent variable, where the scores are measured in an ordinal scale, or a continuous variable where the assumption is normally violated. And then the next is the similar distribution shapes. So for the Kurzweil-Wallis test, to be interpreted as a difference in the medians, the distributions of the score in each group should have a similar shape. So for the next study, titled Practice of Personal Discipline Among Radiologic Technology Students in Their Learning Advancement and Assessment. Variables. The study focused on assessing a single group's or the radiologic technologist discipline in relation to three key variables. So first is that the time management, choosing of peers, and academic pressure. So the responses for each item under these variables were measured using the 5-point Likert scale. So let us talk about why these methods were used for the study. So first is we have the Likert 5-point scale. So this method is specifically used for measuring beliefs, attitudes, and other forms of data that are distinct to each respondent. Tool, they use the percentage and frequency distribution. So these were used to process the data, especially for quantifying personalized data and describing the demographic profile of the respondents, such as their gender and year level. So this type of distribution was used by the researchers after they have gathered information and data from the respondents who answered the Likert 5-point scale. This is the standard descriptive approach for summarizing categorical data. We have the determining the average attitude. After collecting the data from the Likert 5-point scale, the mean determined the measure of central tendency. This allowed the researchers to establish the typical or average level of agreement for the entire group of students regarding each discipline practice. As said in the key variable for the time management, peer selection, and academic pressure. Next is the facilitating interpretation. So the calculated mean scores were directly used to assign the verbal interpretation, or IV, such as agree or neutral. This provided a straightforward way to understand the collective attitude of the radiologic technology students on critical items like their capacity to complete the tasks. And then it has a mean of 3.7, agree. And then for the standard deviation, we have two main reasons. It has a data variability, which the SD is applied to measure the statistical variability of data points. In a survey of attitudes, the SD indicates how much the individual students' responses differ from the mean response. And then the next for the standard deviation is that it indicates consensus or disagreement. A small SD suggests that most of the respondents had similar answers or high consensus, while a large SD suggests that a wide range of opinions or low consensus or high variability. For example, knowing the SD for I can manage to have enough rest helps gauge how uniformly mixed the students' feelings were on this subject, which means there are 3.09 neutral, only partially captures. So for the assumptions of this research, we have the mean and standard deviation, which is under interval data assumptions. So the studies treats the ordinal Likert scale data as if the distance between each response points is equal. And then next we have the percentage and frequency. So under that is the independence. So the responses for each item are assumed to be independent of one another across the different respondents. That is, one student answer does not influence another student's answer.
So next, we'll be tackling the conclusion. So for the first article, the researchers conclude that radiology technologies in Davao City have a strong overall knowledge of infection prevention and control. So they clearly understand infection risk and their attitudes towards safety and very positive. So for the next article, the researchers conclude that personal discipline of radiologic technology student has a direct effect on their learning progress. So the students who have better self-discipline are more capable of managing their academic work. The extracurricular activities, and personal responsibilities to help students improve these skills. So the researchers created student enhancement program that focuses on developing self-discipline, the time management, and the responsibility and proper selection. So both articles shows that continuous improvement is important. So professionals needed stronger knowledge no in infection control, and students need stronger personal discipline to succeed.